Welcome back, everyone. Today we're doing a deep dive on something a little different. Intermittent Explosive Disorder, or IED for short.
That's right.
We're going to be looking at it through the lens of this interesting mini-test I found on the Spiritual Seek website.
Okay.
Now, obviously, this isn't a replacement for, an actual diagnosis from a professional.
Right.
But it's a good way to kind of get us thinking about anger, how we all deal with it, and maybe some of those less healthy ways it can manifest. So, to kick things off, what exactly is IED, for those who might not be familiar?
Well, IED is basically it's a condition where you have these recurring episodes, these outbursts of anger that are like way out of proportion to whatever's happening. It's not just like getting annoyed or frustrated. It's really intense, and it can be, really disruptive to your life, to your relationship.
So it's not just feeling angry, it's the actions.
Yeah.
The reactions that come after.
Exactly. Yeah. People with IED, they really struggle to control that anger. And so it comes out in these outbursts, maybe verbally, emotionally, sometimes even physically, and often very suddenly, like no warning.
And this mini-test, it's not about diagnosing anyone, but it does touch on some of these key areas that you'd look at, right?
Yeah, absolutely. It kind of probes into like 6 different areas: how well you tolerate frustration, whether we lean towards physical aggression or more verbal outbursts, how you feel after you've been angry, how impulsive you are in general, and then how all this impacts your relationships with other people.
I see. So it's like a self-check-in, almost.
Yeah, exactly. Just to kind of see where you're at, how you respond to different situations.
One question that jumped out at me when I was looking at this was, it asks about physical aggression.
Okay.
Straight up. Have you ever physically lashed out during an argument or when angry? And the answers go from never, I avoid it at all costs, all the way to yes, I frequently act physically aggressive. Seems like a pretty blunt way to gauge how intense someone's anger gets.
It is, yeah. And I mean, it's important because we're not just talking about like getting in fights here. With IED, the reaction is so much bigger than the situation warrants that even like a tiny disagreement, it can escalate to violence really quickly.
The test even says that. Like, frequently resorting to physical aggression is a, quote, major red flag. But what does out of proportion to the situation actually mean? Like, can you give me an example?
Sure. So let's say someone accidentally spills their drink on you.
Right.
Most people, they might be a little annoyed. Maybe they'd say, hey, watch out or something.
Yeah.
But someone with IED, that same spill could trigger like a full-blown violent outburst, way more extreme than just a little clumsiness.
But it's not the anger itself, it's how extreme the reaction is compared to what actually happened.
Exactly, and that's like one of the hallmarks of IED.
Gotcha. There was another question that I thought was really interesting, too, about regret after anger. It asks, how do you feel after an episode of intense anger or aggression? And the answers go from, feeling totally justified all the way to feeling super guilty and remorseful.
Yeah, and that's getting at what happens after the outburst, emotionally. Because for a lot of people at IED, that anger fades really fast, and then they're left feeling shocked, even horrified by what they did. It's this cycle of outburst and regret that can be really, really tough.
The test actually says that often feeling regret or guilt after anger could be a sign you're overreacting. But wouldn't anyone feel at least a little bad after yelling at someone or saying something hurtful? Like, how's it different for someone with IED?
Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, most people do experience some remorse after an outburst, but with IED, that regret, it's often as intense as the anger was.
Wow.
It can be completely debilitating. They might even describe feeling like it wasn't even them during the episode, like they were taken over by rage.
So it's like a disconnect between who they want to be and how they acted in that moment.
Right. Exactly. And that disconnect can be incredibly distressing. It can really push someone to seek help.
Makes sense. There's one more question I wanted to touch on that I think kind of gets to the core of this whole thing. It asks, how often do you act impulsively when angry without thinking about the consequences? And again, the answers range from almost never to, frequently.
Yeah, that one's really tapping into that explosive part of IED. Because the outbursts are often so sudden, driven by pure impulse. They're not thinking about the consequences. They're just reacting in the heat of the moment. And that's a big part of what separates it from, just having a bad temper.
Right.
It's that lack of control, that lack of thinking things through beforehand. It's almost like a reflex.
Yeah, this question even calls impulsivity like a, quote, key symptom of IED. And it also encourages people to think about whether their actions like line up with their values and goals? What does that mean in the context of IED?
Well, it's about recognizing that disconnect we talked about earlier, right? Someone with IED might really deeply value being kind, respectful to others. But then their anger takes over, and they end up acting in ways that completely contradict those values. And that misalignment, that it can be really painful. It can be a big motivator to want to change.
Okay, so we've gone through a few of the individual questions here,
Hmm?
but how does the actual scoring system work with this mini test?
So once you've answered all the questions, you basically add up your scores and then see where you fall on this scale. It goes from low risk to high risk of IED.
And again, it's super important to remember this is just a self-assessment, not a diagnosis.
Exactly. Yeah, it's not a replacement for talking to a professional, but it can give you some idea of how severe your anger issues might be. A starting point, maybe.
Right, right. So let's break down these different categories then. What does it mean if you have a low-risk score?
Basically, it means you've got a pretty good handle on your anger. You rarely, if ever, act impulsively or aggressively. You seem to be handling frustration and conflict in a healthy way. And the test basically says, keep up the good work. Keep practicing that self-awareness and emotional regulation.
What about mild risk?
So, folks in this category, they might struggle with anger sometimes, but they're generally managing it pretty well.
Mm-hmm.
Their reactions are mostly under control, but maybe they start to notice some patterns, like they're getting frustrated more easily, or maybe they're acting a little more impulsively than usual.
And the test suggests, looking into some stress management techniques at that point.
Yeah, exactly. Being proactive about it, taking steps to manage stress before it turns into a bigger problem.
Gotcha. What about the moderate risk category? What's that looking like?
This one, it indicates a more significant difficulty with managing that anger and impulsivity.
Okay.
People in this category, they might have episodes of intense anger, aggression that are clearly out of line with what's happening.
And this is where the test starts to recommend, actually getting professional guidance, right?
Yep, exactly. Because at this point, it's not just about managing stress. It's about understanding what's causing these anger issues.
Right.
And learning some healthier coping mechanisms.
Yes.
Therapy can be really valuable for that, giving you the support and the tools to work through it.
Makes sense. And then finally, we have the high-risk category. What's the
Good.
test say about that?
High risk, it indicates a really significant difficulty controlling anger, impulsivity, aggression. The test is pretty clear here. Take these signs seriously. Reach out to a mental health professional, get evaluated, get some support.
Mm-hmm.
It also highlights that these are, common symptoms of IED.
And I think it's important to say here, seeking help is not a sign of weakness.
Oh, absolutely.
It takes a lot of courage to admit that you're struggling and to reach out.
Yeah, for sure. And that support can be life-changing,
Yeah.
With the right treatment, people with IED can absolutely learn to manage their anger, repair those relationships that might have been damaged, live much fuller, healthier lives.
So we've covered the questions, we've covered the scoring system.
Mm-hmm.
What else does this mini test touch on?
So it also includes this little section on, positive affirmations that can help with anger management.
Okay.
Things like saying to yourself, I choose to respond calmly to challenges, or I can control my emotions, just as tools to help manage that anger and build up your resilience.
Oh, I like that. It's like a mental reset button almost.
Yeah, exactly.
Can you talk a little more about why these affirmations might be helpful? How do they work?
Think about it this way. When we're angry, our thoughts tend to spiral.
Right.
We focus on all the negative stuff and our emotions just escalate. But if you consciously choose to repeat these positive affirmations, you're basically interrupting that spiral. You're shifting your focus to something more positive, more empowering.
So it's like retraining your brain to react differently to those triggers.
Exactly. Replacing those automatic negative thoughts with something more constructive. And that shift in your thinking, it can have huge impact on how you behave.
And these affirmations, they're not just for people with IED, right?
Mm.
Anyone can use them.
Oh, absolutely. Anyone who struggles with anger, even if it's just occasional frustration, these are tools that can help anyone build up that emotional resilience, manage their anger in a healthy way.
Okay, so we've explored the mini tests, we've gone over the questions, the scoring system, even got into some helpful affirmations there. Before we wrap up, I want to hear your final thoughts on this whole concept of IED. What really stands out to you?
It's been really interesting, just digging into all this. What strikes me is how much IED is misunderstood.
Yeah.
People brush it off as just a bad temper or like, oh, that's just their personality. But it's a legitimate mental health condition,
Uh-huh.
with
Right.
very real consequences for people.
And it's treatable, right?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. With the right kind of help, people with IED can learn to manage those feelings, manage their reactions, and have really great lives.
So just to kind of sum up what we've learned here, IED is characterized by these recurring outbursts of anger, like we talked about, that are way more intense than the situation calls for. It's not just about feeling angry, it's that lack of control over what happens next. And those outbursts, they can really damage relationships, cause problems at work, even lead to, like, legal trouble sometimes.
Yeah, for sure.
And we looked at some of those questions from that mini test from the Spiritual Seek website,
Mm.
touching on those themes of physical aggression, the regret that comes afterward, that impulsivity. And again, not a diagnostic tool, but it definitely gets you thinking.
Yeah, I like how it makes you kind of look inward a bit.
Right, exactly. And we talked about like recognizing those feelings of guilt, that disconnect between who you want to be and how you acted when you were angry. And we went over that scoring system, emphasizing that if anyone's concerned about their anger, it's crucial to get a professional opinion, not just rely on a test like this.
Absolutely. A professional can really help you understand what's going on.
And then we even got into those positive affirmations, which I thought was really cool.
Yeah.
Just that idea that, those tools, those little mental resets, they could be useful for anyone, whether you have IED or just get frustrated sometimes.
Oh, for sure. We all need a little help sometimes, right?
Exactly. So any final thoughts before we wrap up here? Anything you want to leave our listeners with?
If I had to pick one takeaway, it's this. Anger is normal. It's a human emotion. Everybody feels it.
Hmm.
But when it constantly leads to these outbursts, where you're hurting yourself or other people, damaging things, that's a sign that something needs to change.
And getting help for that. It's not a weakness. It's actually incredibly strong. It shows that you're committed to living a better life, a healthier life.
I couldn't agree more. And like we said, there is support out there. Therapists, counselors, support groups. There are people who understand and they can help you get back in control, build better relationships with yourself and with others.
This has been such an insightful deep dive. I feel like we really got into the nuances of this condition.
It's been great talking about it with you.
Thanks for joining us, everyone, on this journey into understanding intermittent explosive disorder. And until next time, keep diving deep.